questions and then we close by the time. So let me begin. Yes. So as I said, we would try to bring in this trinity that we are seeing of technologies, sustainability and growth. These three are important to determine the kind of support that we need to extend to our labor community. What kind of these technologies that are getting diffused. Then comes in how we are measuring it, and Human Development Index is something which requires augmentation from the perspective that I just mentioned, particularly from well-being. Incidentally, there are groups which have come up to see well-being also as part of alternative development paradigm. There is a big group which is led by Harvard, Oxford, and the Kiel University in Germany under a joint initiative for alternative development paradigm. This is also part of the UN task force which Secretary General has constituted. Well-being is to be added in the UN indicators from 2026 November. Already exercise is going on at ECOSOC, and some of us are part of that work. This is largely in terms of this growth requirements that have sort of inputs from sustainable technologies. Yesterday, Professor Jha in his presidential address did refer to issues which are intertwined in terms of how we look at the new sort of parameters for the growth, and he alluded in his address some three major parameters that he emphasized upon. And I think it is important here to see how efficient and accessible solutions that are coming up are required. Professor Deepak Nair in the morning session did mention in terms of the trade-off that we have in terms of efficiency and inclusion in the growth process. If we see the debate, but also production networks and the kind of skills that are needed. Literature has also moved in terms of how we see the increased growth elasticity of infrastructure. Bhanu and his own group. Earlier, the numbers were very small, but now we see the addition to physical infrastructure, what spillover effects it may bring in. And this, if you see IIIT Bala's paper, which has applied similar model for digital public infrastructure. What kind of gains you can really have? Bhanu calculates it 5 to 7.5%. Earlier World Bank study gave 3%, and Bala at IIIT has taken it forward to 11%. So this is something that we are seeing in terms of how digital public infrastructure is going to bring in major changes that are there. The International Energy Agency, it has also come up with several numbers which have also varied in terms of what countries they are being implemented. So they have analyzed China, EU, and have also seen, if you see in the third chapter of the report, they have compared that with US in terms of what different effects you would get rather than a universal outcome of this. Here we have tried to see how the macroeconomic regulatory context that comes in from the R&D push, but also from the idea of infusion of social benefits, the direct benefit transfers and many others which are going to contribute in terms of dimensions that are needed in terms of social acceptance of the technologies and the kind of skill that you need to take the dimensions and particularly the products forward. In Kerala, we were part of a team which Amrita University commissioned, and in Trivandrum itself, they identified a pilot where tablets were given for collecting data to ASHA workers. And they showed how many people actually skip the lifestyle disease-related drug management. And you find that the issues are quite serious in terms of how we get that data and how we see the health sector management that is happening. In terms of this growth imperative and the kind of human capital that we need, we find that the economic growth and dependency on human capital is something which is well recognized and well documented. So is the literature on skill gap and the kind of structural constraints that we are ending up with. papers after papers, we are seeing that the human skill gap is a huge impediment in terms of the growth strategy that they should set out. As technology becomes center, we find that those skills are important. It is not important to see in terms of literacy and other huge cycle that we had been envisaging. Nature of technology and its absorption requires more efforts in terms of diffusing this skill to the next tier of people who are going to be part of this larger effort to bring in the evidences that are necessary to see how structural rigidities and limitations are to be overcome by the policy emphasis that we are trying to bring in. What kind of skills we are talking about, what kind of different tiers we need to address, and there again debate is very interesting, and multiple papers are there for me to confine at this point 4 broad skills that NCAR and CRISIL have identified for Indian context. I have picked that up. CII has also done a survey which was the basis of these 2 reports. In terms of the foundational skills that you need, the well-being part brings in the socio-emotional skills, because the transition that you are seeing requires a lot of hand-holding for the labor class, whether they are in the automation, even for this Jyoti garments which we interviewed, people required huge emotional support, because the labor in the textile unit, they are so few that they really need support of each other for this transition. Earlier, the kind of textile mills and sector that they have seen, this has shrinked, but output has multiplied. So these specialized skills are important, and so are the digital skills. So how do we bring in skills to enhance employability is one major dimension. And this is possible through both accessibility, equity, inclusivity that we talk of, but also in form of quality and relevance. So you find a large parameter set of indicators which are important in terms of AEI plus QR. So what you see in terms of access, equity, inclusion, what variables for each one of them, and what kind of quality and relevance we see of these technologies and their diffusion that we need to have. And that's where each of the international agency or specific entities which have produced, I have tried to cull out those messages from the studies that have supported each of these variables with multiple studies that are needed. Now, what should be India's approach if we are seeing the world around technologies and the intellectual property associated with those technologies are trying to get into this sphere of techno-nationalism, which is trying to block multiple entities. Hajun Chang's work of kicking away the ladder now has a new context, and this new context doesn't come from the entry barriers. Entry barriers are coming from more of geopolitics. And this has become a reality in terms of how blatantly technology provisions are undermined in terms of their sharing. So irrespective of length of the patent, irrespective of earlier criticisms and debates in terms of how evergreening of patent, which Carlos Correa and others criticize, even Dr. Nagesh worked on this field, we are seeing this techno-nationalism which is trying to completely avoid what we saw as inclusive growth and techno-globalism. And this is where the contemporary debate in terms of US-China contestation on global leadership has created larger challenges in terms of how you bring in those technologies and of course access to those technologies for the necessary delivery of citizen-centric programs that we have. And in this slide, I have tried to capture those citizen-centric programs that I referred to earlier. Multiplicity of these programs at the state level, far away from 100% exhaustion at the district level. So what we saw in terms of, Prof. Mr. Gill mentioned from the World Bank, only 3% of decentralization in public finance. It's a reality also in terms of how these programs are transferred at local level. So you find that huge limitation at the district level, largely in terms of the necessary skills that are needed, but also in terms of how we can bring in people who are trained to take these multiple programs for digital data and technology-enabled governance skills that are needed at the district level to take these programs forward. Multiple of such programs, which these figures are mentioning, are necessary for us to show and see sustainability of both for infrastructure, but also of community-centric implementation skills, which require, even for simple things like water testing, renewable energy, and they are more localized. And more localized challenges which are sort of bringing in this plurality, but also diversity of challenges. So how you create those skills and those capacities at the local level, they are extremely interesting. So now if I leave that aside and bring the focus on our human development index, which became one of the parameters in terms of guiding the way skill map should come up, and what are the ways we can really focus on human development index, we find that more efforts are needed, and not that HDI has not been augmented. It has been augmented continuously since it was first envisaged and established as part of what Mahbubul Haq and Amrita Sen proposed. Since then, UN has been working continuously, UNDP has been working continuously, and is trying to bring in parameters and variables that are necessary. But here, through multiple such initiatives, whatever programs we are seeing, we are trying to see these skills as skewed in terms of the requirement to deliver these programs. And this is something where new efforts are needed to take Human Development Index from its current framework beyond the framework that it has followed, and trying to bring in parameters which are trying to address the inequality in health, education, and in income, in all the three variables that are needed. You also find dimensions that are important for delivery of other social security measures that are needed, be that housing or the kind of employment environment that is needed to deliver. The effort is also very much evident in terms of the gender inequality and HDI to measure some of those dimensions, and the literature. If you see on the HDI gaps and critiques, it has also multiplied in last couple of years. We find that more and more parameters are coming in. A recent study from UNESCO of the growing challenge in China of the mental well-being, depression has become a major challenge in China, which has been very ably documented by UNESCO report. We are also seeing this challenge in a couple of other emerging markets, where more and more emphasis is being laid in terms of how the social engagement happens. So the kind of evidences that are coming in are emphasizing in terms of quality of job, and this is something that we see with the transition to SDG. The debate now that we are going forward with what do we do after 2030, what should happen after SDG period is over. This debate is also capturing what we discussed within HDI and what we discussed and felt in terms of the quantity to quality shift in MDG to SDG. Now that quality brings in new dimensions, that the kind of skills that we need, and that's where Human Development Index requires a bit of change, where people are concerned about environmental quality they are in, the kind of air that we have, the kind of access to water that we have. All those issues are important in terms of how we view labor-related issues. So labor-related issues are no more confined to access to employment alone. The debate, discussion has multiplied, has deepened, and has brought in several new issues in terms of how subjective well-being, the issues that are related to social comprehension and connect are bringing in the key gaps up. And that's where the issue of well-being and its interconnectedness with Human Development Index comes in. We find the new variables that are there. 38 variables are to be added to make Human Development Index more relevant for contemporary times and the challenges with the climate change that we are dealing with. Huge change satisfaction that people have to derive in terms of delivery of services and also for hiring of services. There is also this discussion the other day we had in our RBI board meeting for us to focus on dearness allowance but also on climate allowance. The kind of crisis labor face when the heat impact is multiplied. The idea of excessive rains and people working in them, they require a very different kind of package that is needed. And this is more with regional variation happening for multiple days. This is my first time in Bihar at Nalanda University. And I was quite surprised to see that if you see the area beyond Rajgir to Patna in between, at least for 5 months, you see agriculture fields inundated with water. So people have to work in that condition. This is climate change that is happening and also the kind of governance issues that you have before you. So this requires our new parameters to be factoring in the kind of climate change and its impact on day-to-day life of our labor community. So that part I think is extremely important. These indicators and measurement are also well documented in a recent World Development paper. They have tried to work out the parameters in which a sustainable well-being index has already been computed. The recent OECD report on well-being measurement has captured these parameters. When I was at RIS in 2023 in the G20 presidency, we gave this to Government of India, and fortunately the G20 declaration has emphasized on this transition that we need to well-being measurement, replacing or bringing in GDP along with well-being measurement. So that debate I think is equally important for us to bridge the new paradigm that we are seeing in terms of how that is going. Now coming from Indian text, which brings in my Nalanda hat here, is more in terms of how Indic thought process always emphasized on Desh, Kal and Patra. So this trinity is equally important for us to see how Indian thought process always thought of labor management from a much deeper perspective. So the idea of well-being is coming in from what was actually emphasized in terms of Kautilya's Arthashastra, but you also see by somebody who was disciple of Kautilya and the Niti Shastra that came out from Kamadya, who was student of Chanakya. He explained this dimension in a more meaningful manner in terms of how Vedantic non-dualism connect this theory of well-being with the larger idea of the positivity that we need in terms of approaching the question of labor and its welfare. The idea of integration of well-being framework with its contextualization and the necessary skill gaps that we see, it requires better rigging in form of how we see the address that is required. I think it is also pertinent before I close to mention that if well-being related parameters are to be infused in the existing framework of human development indicator, part of that has to be done in form of how we do this at the state level and the sub-state level, because that's where the source of development and that's where the source of infusion of frontier technologies would come in. I stop here. Thanks for your attention.